I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. Help us welcome our guest today, Jeff Clute. He's helping people and projects around the world find their way forward using resonance, vision, and inner guidance. Jeff Clute.
All right. This is another spontaneous combustion on the Poetry of Predicament podcast. Of late, I've had a handful of truly delightful interviews that have come. They've been suggested by previous guests who really get what this program is focused on. And they somehow contact me and they say, you know what, you got to talk to this person. You really got to talk to this person. And so I'm starting to really trust these, these introductions, no matter how little I might know someone. And this particular guest today, we've been on this call just a few moments before turning on the record button. And it's with great pleasure that I introduce Jeff Clute. And I know almost nothing about Jeff, but the tiny fragments that we've exchanged, both in this conversation in these few moments, and then also in an introductory email exchange, and the introduction, of course, the I think the chances are extremely strong that we will have a lot to talk about, and there'll be a tremendous amount of value, not only for us, but possibly for you, the viewers, as well. So, Jeff, I'd love to hear your side of how it's felt to be in this kind of odd approach, through the fog with each other. And welcome here. And I really look forward to hearing more about this, what seems like a quite extraordinary life you've got going on. Welcome.
Thank you, Dean. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you and with your community. And it is an unexpected delight. I knew we were going to be speaking today, imagined it might be an introduction for something to come later. However, I'm very much in favor of going with the spontaneity. And in some ways, the unrehearsed is so much more alive. So I'm as interested as you are to see what could emerge.
Great. Well, I don't know what feels best to you in terms of just giving us mapping out some of the territory that you call home, and what it looks like out ahead of you, and what got you to this place where you're doing what you do in the world. So I invite you to start wherever it's comfortable for you.
Okay, well, I'm going to start somewhere and follow it everywhere. There's a fellow named Myron Rogers who said something very similar. So I've been on an interesting journey for the last 10 years where I haven't had a home base in the usual sense. I've been moving around from place to place, collaborating with people on different projects, and following what I would say is a resonance, a deep felt knowing of where to go next and how long to be in a place and when to move on. And I actually have a methodology that I call resonance mapping, which helps me to discern holistically how life is moving. And I help clients to make strategies based on the life force and the emergent possibilities. And so it's entirely appropriate that I do that for myself, but I do it all the time. Constantly, actually, I'm feeling for resonance as I go about daily activities. So there's a spiritual practice in this, actually, which is to be as attuned to life as I can be, And the more I do it, the more attuned I become, and the more I can share that gift with others and help systems to become attuned to life. So for the last 10 years, without really an overarching plan, I've been following the energy, following the winds. And that had me first in Silicon Valley, and then in Seattle, and then up and down the West Coast several times. I was in the Napa Valley for a while in 2011, co-founding an initiative called Thrive Napa Valley. I was extremely interested in the concept of thriving and the possibility that the invocation of thriving could introduce new possibilities into a conversation. I remember the phrase possibility of thriving, pot, came to me, and I was on fire with pot, and people looked at me with bewilderment. But something deep inside said the possibility of thriving is real, like when the Buddha introduced the possibility of enlightenment. Prior to that point, people could aspire to whatever they were aspiring to, but perhaps not liberation on the deepest level. So when we introduce a possibility, that is a powerful act. But I knew really none of this. I didn't know any theory, and I still know so little. I just have to be honest with you. But I've been following some threads and connecting. For instance, in Seattle, an initiative called the Happiness Initiative, now known as the Happiness Alliance. I was somehow inducted to be the founding board president because I could help to establish an energetic template, a way of being with one another, kind of maybe consciousness DNA for the organization. So that was my role, even though I'm not an expert on gross national happiness and other aspects of the happiness and well-being movement, which is thankfully growing and growing. Seattle is a place where things start. It's known as a birthplace for social transformation initiatives. So that's one reason I was drawn to Seattle. And another, well, a couple initiatives that I connected with there, something called the Compassionate Action Network, which prior to my arrival had organized a 5-day experience with the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu and others. It was very powerful and transformative for Seattle. It set Seattle on a new path. And soon after that, Seattle became the first city to commit to compassion, to have compassion as a top priority that would involve living into over some time, but at least it had been named. And then connected with CAN, Compassionate Action Network, is the Charter for Compassion, which is now its own organization. But for a time, we were stewarding, we were incubating this beautiful charter, which is a call for compassion across differences, a recognition of the golden rule at the heart of every religious and spiritual and ethical tradition. So I had a good grounding in applied spirituality by virtue of my time in Seattle. I had some kinds of spiritual awakenings beforehand. So the consciousness was of great interest to me, but it becomes more interesting when it can be applied to reduce suffering. So compassion has been a theme that's woven through my work. Mm-hmm. And at one point, I think I was on 6 or 7 nonprofit boards. And this gave me a lot of exposure to organizations as organisms with their foibles and also their tremendous potential to do great things in the world. When people come together in a coherent way, as Margaret Mead said, we can change the world. So there was a time, though, when I stopped joining nonprofit boards and really started to work more with coaching clients. And I've never been 100% on board with coaching because I don't have a certification. My approach has been to listen deeply, to source, to tune into those deep currents of life and receive signals, guidance, wisdom that can be applied in different situations. And this practice of sourcing, it's related to the practice of resonance mapping, tends to produce some high quality perspective shift for people. Like they can look at things in a different way, in a deeper way, in a higher way, in a more whole way. And I really love helping organizations, since I have so much experience with them now, to navigate these times of great transition, these times of volatility and chaos and disruption, which of course includes the climate, and it includes everything under the sun and stars. And everything seems to be disrupted right now. And I have to say that moving around for 10 years, and I've told you part of the story, and just for brevity, I won't tell you all of it, but it's also included a lot of time in other time zones, and in India and the UK, and a lot of time in Australia, interestingly. The practice of moving and following the energy and the resonance has allowed me to relax somehow into the flow without having to know where it's leading. And my own experience has been ever increasing joy, and somehow a knowing that life has its deep wisdom that is working itself out in part through the tumultuousness and through the heartbreak and the collective heart opening that seems to be happening. So I'm showing up for that, and I have a knowing. This is almost a contrary perspective, but I have a knowing that we make it. Like, I've seen it in meditation. I've seen so clearly and vividly, and I've calibrated, and I've resonance mapped, and I've sourced, to confirm that I'm not just fantasizing. I've seen 2121 and 2200, and it's really quite remarkable. And so then I can backcast, and I can somehow bridge the I want to say not too distant future in the scheme of things with where we are right now, and begin to notice where the trim tabs are and where we might begin to align ourselves with whatever the thread is that connects now and this promising future. Let me say this, I've been doing a lot of healing work as well. So there's the kind of systems change that I'm alluding to, but not maybe speaking to exactly yet. And then there's this interesting phenomenon where 2 summers ago in 2018, I was in Crestone, Colorado, which is a very powerful place. Shamans have gone there for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, to gain and strengthen their abilities. And I've received shamanic abilities, you could say, there and previously, but especially there. And I was at a dinner gathering with indigenous elders from South America, including Kogi. And okay, I'll tell a story. A friend walked in, and she looked like she could use a bit of a lift, because it seemed as if she was dragging and had wilted in the heat of the day. This was August. And so I said, I've never done this before. I said, let me offer you an energy blessing, and let's see what happens. It was moving in me. So this is the sourcing. This is the spontaneous presence that will do what it does if we make ourselves available to it. So particularly in that very high energy environment, I was available. So I put my hands around her head and shoulders, not touching, but maybe 6 or 12 inches away. And she started to convulse, which was definitely something that could be disturbing, but she said, don't worry, I'm just sensitive to Shaktipat. It's not something that I had planned to do. And after a few minutes, she said, wow, I can feel my whole body. I can feel my toes, which would be normal for you, I imagine, but she had broken her neck. That I didn't know. So that was the first really big experience of some kind of healing energy that could be invoked through this vehicle. And so I've been doing that hundreds, thousands, actually at this point, many thousands of times. And if I don't do it, I feel like some gift is being underutilized. And it works in person, it works over Zoom, it works with groups. And there are a number of other what I call blessings, empowerments that have come through since then. So in the process, people have had some powerful healing experiences, but I know it also works on deeper levels that might take time to show up. And I feel like that's all been practiced, or let's call it collective Shaktipat, collective even Shivapat, which is more about consciousness than energy, where not just me, many of us can open up and become a conduit, if that's the right word, for some very powerful maybe higher dimensional energies. I want to stay grounded, but there's something that borders on magical and miraculous that feels possible to me. And because of these, well, I gave you one example, but other examples like it. One fellow, he put his hand over an image that I had created on the computer, and he didn't touch the computer screen, but he put his hand over this image, and he could feel strong energy, and I could too, vicariously, because I'm connected with these technologies. And afterwards, he had like a stigmata. It wasn't actually bleeding, but there was this vivid red mark in the palm of his hand that stayed there for quite some time. So these sorts of things, wow, they defy conventional theory. And this knowing that I'm talking about is that we can bring our deep, powerful, spiritual, energetic, and physical selves forward for the purpose of healing ecosystems, healing the collective consciousness of humanity. And I believe that I've seen evidence that it is really happening and that it is really working in my clients and in the communities where I operate. Everyone around me seems to be getting healthier, seems to be getting becoming more awake. And we can talk about that. So something's working here. And I'm very humble because I can't claim to understand it, although I have lots of ideas. I don't even know that the understanding is the point. But I'm showing up for a massive planetary healing on a much shorter time frame than the science currently contemplates. And that's really at the core of the Jeff guy. One final point. I received, in December, I was in Australia, which is very powerful land. I received, you could say, a download of 12 paths of homecoming. And then subsequently, I received a visual cosmology. I asked for a cosmology that would be as true as possible, because I've made many maps of consciousness and they're all approximate. So I received from Australia, I would say from the land, some powerful insight into how we can navigate home. And these 12 paths include a path of power, which happens to be my path. And so I've embraced the power, whether it's Shaktipat or whatever, but with the knowing that if we don't say yes to our powerful selves and we don't show up fully, then it is a question whether we make it through this transition. So this has to be right power. It has to be aligned with life. It's not power over, it's power, it's certainly power with, and it's power as life itself. So it's non-dual. It's rooted in realization of oneness and non-separation. And I would say even deeper than that, going into the deep roots of being. So I'm here to empower and to support healing. And it has to come from a deep love. I talk about perfect love, which is beyond conditional and unconditional, because sometimes love has to be conditional. Sometimes it needs to show up within conditioned reality in order to unlock the healing or unlock the power or unlock the liberation that is available. And I'm hopeful, I'm extremely optimistic that we can and are waking up. Thanks to the challenges in large part. We needed a big dose of seemingly impossible challenges to actually step up.
I got it. All right. Well,
thanks for
you.
listening. That was a long introduction. Like I said, I would start somewhere and follow it everywhere.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a few things there. I'm particularly drawn to ask you for any amount of detail that you're inclined to share about the relatively positive future that you look out and have seen. I myself have no such positive vision, and yet I'm very curious. I'm very warmly curious about any other vision that someone might have to share. And so, when you say we make it as you look out into the future, I'm curious what kind of resolution you have on your view. Like, is there any sort of indication of population out ahead, of energy source out ahead, of relative prosperity out ahead? And I think most important for me personally, uh, what condition is our global habitat in? You know, I've shared with many of my guests that really my anchor to this world, my primary anchor is through the ocean. It's just where I've always recharged my soul, and where I find the most peace and so on. Uh, and there are aspects of how we've treated the planet that have ended up impacting the ocean tremendously. And so when I hear a boldly positive view like you're sharing in a relatively short time frame, I'm deeply curious. So I would be curious if there's any more resolution or detail that you could share about your vision.
Sure, happy to do that. And happy to bracket my vision within a context where multiple scenarios are possible and multiple worldviews are needing to be honored. And I had an experience the other night where I received some information which was not to be shared because it's important not to disrupt people who are working on essential missions because of the deep concern about where we are and where we could be headed. So I could be wrong. Don't take my word for it.
Sure.
But here's what I've seen.
Yeah.
So in one meditation, which I got was 2117, I was just spontaneously in upstate New Jersey, what is now upstate New Jersey. I don't have a sense that the United States still exists as such then. Much sooner, I've been getting that bioregional administrative boundaries would emerge. And there'll be a global network of cities, much more than even states or larger federal government superstructures. But that's shorter term. I want to come back to that. So in 2117, I'm in what used to be known as upstate New Jersey, and it's lush. I'm at ground level, and there's a lot of water. It's clear that it's warm. It's almost subtropical, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at a building, a very large building with a domed roof, but not like a geodesic dome or something, but a much more gradual sloping dome, like over a hockey rink, let's say. So it covers a significant area, and it's very quiet. It's very peaceful. Humans have adapted. The roof of the dome is white because it's reflecting the sunlight, and that would be a natural thing to do even now, granted. But in this knowing, in this experience, I had a knowing that humans had needed to adapt, and so climate shift disruption is real, I would say. And the water, however, was clean, and this seemed to be some kind of spiritual center. In this, it was sort of more of a flash, so I don't even want to call it like a journey because it was just all fairly instantaneous. There was the sense that I might be a spiritual teacher, perhaps one of many connected with this community, because I'd be pretty old by then, 2117. I'd be, say, 144, I think. So we could ask a lot of questions about how we get there. I did see another vision of, I think it was 2300, might have been 2321. And in this vision, actually, nature was doing extremely well. And there were plenty of humans around, but we were tucked away. Our structures were hidden. Um, and our communities were built into nature. And there was a sense of non-separation. There was also a sense of, I'll say, a higher dimensionality, in that although everything looked much like it does today, up and down and side to side and back and forth, 3D, you could say, there was like an overlay where there are other levels of reality you could tune into and actually draw energy from. And so there's this sense of being able to manifest out of the Earth system in a way like the Earth is the holodeck on Star Trek, and you can ask for what's needed, and you have to have great clarity in what you're asking for, but we can manifest things in alignment with life that are there when we need them, and then released back into the energy flow when we don't. And so we can have a human experience, and we can have things, but we don't have an accumulation of unused things, shall we say. And how that might be possible, I'll just bring in something that I know from other meditations into physics, meditations on physics, and into the leading edge possibilities or beyond the horizon. And something that hit me, actually, I had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening long before I knew what that word was, which is why I trusted that it was a legitimate experience, because I'm trying to have it. I was thinking about physics. I was thinking about elementary particles, and particularly about the different types of quarks. And I was contemplating how, if there's a higher dimensional space, which right now has not been proven, but lots of physicists are wondering, then the orientation of these elementary particles in that higher dimensional space from a 3D perspective could determine the types of particles, their flavor and their up and downness and that sort of thing. And I knew I must be onto something, because I had this incredible rush of energy up my spine, unlike anything I'd experienced before, and it went all up to my head, and then suddenly I'm standing up, dancing around the room, and it was quite a pleasant feeling. And then I was at the whiteboard, I would say, painting equations, because although I love physics and I studied a lot of it, I can't claim to be a physicist. Subsequently, as I meditated more, because this told me, well, first of all, it was fun. I realized the second law of thermodynamics will not be upheld forever. It makes our math and our conceptual frameworks very, very tight and tidy. But what I was seeing actually is that consciousness transduces like a deeper light, I'll say light for lack of a better word, into energy. So we're bringing something beyond the current scope of the universe into the universe through our consciousness. And so a very, very, very conscious person can, like in the stories of ascended masters, manifest things with this energy. And I was even quantifying how much energy is coming in, new energy is coming into the universe all the time. And that could account for why the universe seems to be expanding faster than physicists can account for. Like, there's actually more energy than we expect, based on the supposition that the total energy content of the universe is zero and it never changes. I'm saying actually there's a larger context in the universe that is feeding this universe. And so maybe in a very, very meta context, the second law will hold, but that's beyond our ability to calculate or quantify. So in the meantime, this higher dimensionality of the planet would be a function of our realizing the nature beyond nature as we've known it, and then our ability to transduce, I'll say, consciousness into energy. And with that energy, do useful things like healing, repairing the world, manifesting useful medicines that maybe haven't existed before. As our collective self-concept expands, we're introducing more degrees of freedom for innovation and solutions. And already within the limited context of Silicon Valley, you can see how much of a difference technology has made in connecting the world, and it's fundamentally shifting our consciousness. So now imagine that consciousness turns back on itself in this virtuous cycle of awakening and expansion and innovation and healing. And that's how potentially in a shorter term than we imagine, we could get to a healed planet where the oceans are not filled with plastic debris, and the question of acidification and species loss due to rising temperatures, like somehow all of that, maybe not all of it, maybe some of it, maybe hopefully a lot of it can be mitigated, but it's going to come back to our consciousness on many levels, technically and spiritually. But I'm particularly intrigued by this consciousness, energy, matter equivalency, where through our consciousness, we may be able to bring more stuff, good stuff into the world. To put it coarsely, while I drink my tea.
I have a couple of, I guess, follow-up questions particularly to that future vision that you've been mapping out for us. I'm curious if, from your point of view now, are there particular energetics or aspects of our presence in the material world that folks like myself, let's call me an average guy, are there particular practices or skill sets or expandable capacities that a guy like me could work on, could bring forth, put some effort into expanding in myself to be of service in some way to this more positive future out ahead?
The answer is certainly yes, and there's no limit to possible ways we can practice and be of service, and the service is a form of practice. If I calibrate the extent to which you're on path, I get you're really doing it. Like what you're already doing is a miraculous contribution. And I know you as quote average guy, average person, has a lot of spiritual practice behind you. And increasingly people do. Like there are more and more and more sleepers. I'm organizing a gathering that will include meditators on Wall Street who are in senior positions in the financial industry. So there are sleepers everywhere. The average person is not so average. Obviously, meditation and mindfulness are popular now in the sense that people know about it. You are no longer looked upon as crazy if you talk about meditation or mindfulness practices. And that's always good. I get, though, when I tune in, that meditation is a primary practice for maybe, like, in other words, a primary practice that will really, really help someone. This is totally controversial, but how fun to say it when you're being recorded, for maybe 23% of the population. And maybe it's also a question of definition because there's so many types. Walking in nature could be a meditation. Okay, right. Fair enough. So I actually, when I'm working with someone, I'll ask, what are the practices that you already have? What do you love to do, which may or may not be thought of as a practice? And then we'll resonance map what is most alive and most deeply rooted in truth, because that's what resonance mapping does. And if it also resonates for the person, that's a good sign, because it's not really my place to say, this is your path, but I can introduce some possibilities, and we'll see, we'll test it out. Mm-hmm. So what comes to me spontaneously is the question right now. And I was in a WhatsApp messaging conversation last night with somebody who's, I think, diagnosed with Asperger's, and he's a genius software engineer. I love working with geniuses because they're sort of out of balance in one way, and yet they have so much potential. And when it's in alignment, it's amazing. So here's a fellow who's really committed to his awakening, and he doesn't have a meditation practice. He's probably not in the 23%. But for him, coding is a meditation practice. And for me, I used to write software. coding was how I got into the flow. And one of the things that I realized was, oh, the code that I'm writing is rewriting me. I'm rewriting my own operating system. I'm healing myself through writing this code and rewriting this code. So actually, software development is a spiritual practice for some people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in his case, though, he makes pretty strong statements about, what is right, and it comes from a really strong logic. Like, his logic is impeccable. So I invited him to put himself in the shoes of other people who might be watching the video or reading what he writes. And before pressing the publish button, imagine, okay, so he had created or co-created a video about the coronavirus and pointing out the minuscule probability of actually, dying from this. And he's in Vietnam at the moment. I don't want to say too much more, lest it become personally identifying. And so I appreciate the rigor and the logic, helping people like not be so afraid. But if you're too forceful, then you stomp on people's emotions. So I brought in the notion, as Sri Aurobindo wrote about, the good, the true, the beautiful, and all three need to be in balance. Because if you're totally focused on the facts, you can step on people who have maybe lost a loved one, or they've seen really terrifying news reports. So there is that baggage that needs to be considered. And so, yeah, the spiritual practice that emerged in this WhatsApp conversation was rigorously, since you're a rigorous guy, put yourself in the role of every type of person who might be interacting with the message. And then once you have that data, you can adjust the message or not, but at least you'll be conscious of the impact that it might have on people. So a practice like that of putting yourself in the shoes of another is automatically consciousness raising. It automatically expands one's awareness and perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, consciousness has to do, well, there are like a dozen different definitions of consciousness, but one that's really useful has to do with the extent to which we can see and know and be holistic and take into account all of the system, which is why systems thinking is such an important innovation. And then there are no externalities anymore. There's no separation. There's no away. There's never throwing something away.
Yeah. Well,
We're never throwing something away. That's another spiritual practice. Look at your waste stream. I love practical spirituality. Like, we don't have to disappear from life to become more spiritual.
I love that. You're one of the few people I've heard break it down to just that simple a level. It's really got a beauty to it. I appreciate you saying that.
Thank you.
A quick addendum to that last question. I'm curious, when you look out at the world right now, are there particular aspects of how humanity's showing up that really get your attention as being particularly derogatory or causing a profound level of, I guess I want to say friction in our forward movement? Certainly toward anything positive. In other words, what's the bad stuff we're doing that really gets your attention at the moment?
Great question. So there's a level on which I see the friction as serving a purpose. One of the statements that came to me in an inspired way is the last breath of the ego will be in service of spirit. So whatever people are doing with whatever agenda is somehow in service of our evolution. And I even have a sense that humanity is on, dare I say, an optimal and accelerated path of collective awakening, which includes all of the eddies of pain and disruption and conflict as fuel for the process. And so that's one level, and I can say, hey, hallelujah, but that doesn't satisfy me completely. I'm happy that perspective is possible. I'm also happy for the background, ringtone. I hope that's not too disturbing for you. But there's a level where I also feel a sadness. So I'll give you an example. The situation in India with the new immigration law, which excludes Muslims from having citizenship status. And all other religions basically are allowed in if they've come from certain countries where there are challenges. And so there are riots in Delhi, and there has been significant loss of life at a higher number than has been the case for some decades, actually. Fortunately, it's not a huge number, but it's too high. And I'm going to India for a month. I'll be there in a week and a half, I think. And it saddens me that after all this time, the Hindus and the Muslims are not getting along, and that we have a political party, the BJP, that is essentially committed to one over the other. Mm-hmm. Even if they try to soften that a little bit, that's the case, a nationalist agenda. And I know that serves a larger process because people are getting riled up, and now that there is an internet where people are hyper connected, there can be a global immune response. Like Paul Hawken talked about, the humanity's immune system is being activated. So now we've got a collective conscious immune system, much more than we did before. So as these issues come up, we can hopefully address them more consciously and decisively so they don't keep coming up. So may this be the last time that something like this comes up. I also look at the situation in the United States politically and the deep, deep polarization, which causes enormous pain within families, for instance, not to mention the people who are on the border. And I'm actually in a home right now of someone who's organizing a significant event called Border Aid, which is similar to Live Aid, but bringing attention, awareness, and resources to bear to help those who have been, I'll say, wronged by a non-compassionate system. And so I'm speaking on a level right now where things are not perfect. Shunryu Suzuki said, everything is perfect and it can always be improved, or something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing. So this is the level where things can definitely be improved. I'm not happy about what's going on the southern border. I was just actually on the Mexican border for a writing retreat and feeling into the energy there, and I'm not happy about it. The polarization politically serves a purpose, because when you have an extreme polarization, I'll do a visual here with my fingers, that actually opens up a space where something new can come through from the ground of being, let's say. So polarization has its function, but the pain is really intolerable. So now I'm looking for the collective immune response, and that may come in the election this year. And I'm not going to say Trump is good or Trump is bad. I'm going to say he's fulfilling a function. And I even get, when I tune into life, that he's doing a lot of good, even as there's so much unconsciousness, I would say, in the political system right now. And maybe it's always been. And now we can see it. So I'm grateful for seeing it, and it's time for an improvement.
Yeah. Great. Well, I appreciate you going there. As uncomfortable as it may be, I very much appreciate the sobriety and the balance. So Jeff, I'm curious. You obviously are a person who you get around. You're going to be on the East Coast. You're going to be going to India. I'm curious if a person wants to find out more about what you're currently up to. Is there a way to find out?
Yes. Well, there's a website, jeffvanderclute.com. I wasn't enthusiastic about having a personal website. After working with so many amazing organizations, I really wanted to honor the collectivity of this work. But then I wrote too many articles and I needed a place to put them. So if you go to jeffvanderclute.com, you can read some of what I've been writing recently and learn about the organizations that I'm connected with. And like any website, it's a work in progress. Any website, it's a work in progress. So okay, it's not perfect, but it's being improved. And I'm also involved in a company called Enlightening Journeys and Expeditions, which will be linked to from my site, but it's enlighteningjourneys.com if you want to go there directly. And the idea is to create experiences that are extremely transformative in powerful places, and and pull out all the stops for awakening. And I've been doing, in the last 2.5 years, I've co-designed and co-led 35 deep dive retreats, intensive experiences, 21 of which have been about the consciousness of money. And money, of course, is one of the areas where we could have a long conversation, the role of money in the world and how it could become luminous, actually. But yeah, I needed a playground for doing something completely different and experimental, and that's Enlightening Journeys.
Got it.
Yeah.
You know, for some reason, I'm inclined to ask if you've ever connected up with a guy named Joe Brewer.
I have, not recently, but I met him, I think it was 2010 on Whidbey Island.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I spent a lot of time. The last time I actually had an apartment was on Whidbey Island. That was quite a while ago.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason, there was a part of what you've most recently been sharing about it rang of some of Joe's recent projects as well. Might be good for the two of you to make a little connection. You never know.
I have great respect for him, and that would be fun.
Yeah.
I'm sure productive.
Well, Jeff, I'm feeling the envelope of our time together is drawing to a close, and I'm curious, given again your vision that you've been generously sharing with us, and also your personal experience. I'm wondering if there's anything that you could offer to someone who might be new to the idea of a conscious alternative path in these times. You've been on your particular version of a path for quite some time. What could you offer to someone who's new to it, given what you've seen, what you've experienced?
I'll tell you what comes to me. The words pay attention. Pay attention to life. Pay attention to what's going on around you. Be open to not actually understanding what's happening. Be available to the possibility that life is actually working itself out and is giving us or preparing to give us what we need so that humans can align with life. So there's a certain amount of hope and faith in that one. And look for the subtle signs. This is why paying attention is so important. Look for the subtle signs that things are starting to work better. The green shoots, if you will. And when we actually witness what's working, this is an insight from, appreciative inquiry in part. When we focus on what is working, we can grow that. You've heard what you appreciate appreciates, maybe. We can grow these green shoots with our love and our awareness of them, because there's a lot more to awareness than this passive sense of receiving input or stimuli. It's sending feedback into consciousness, into the great mind, saying, hey, more of this, please.
Yeah.
And that's why see no evil, hear no evil actually is deeply, deeply meaningful. It's not about avoidance. It's actually about, what we choose to focus on. So let's pay attention to what's working without burying our heads in the sand, because there is that dimension or that level of reality where we need to make some improvements. We need to make some changes fast. And we'll be able to do that with much more empowerment if we're rooted in a knowing that it's possible, that some things are working and that they can work a whole lot better as we invest love and energy into them.
Yeah, nicely said. I really appreciate it. As I mentioned at the very beginning of our time here, there are certain interviews that I really have no clue, even what the content will be, much less what the energetics will be by the end of the conversation. And this is one of those. And I know that there will be some of the folks that are regular viewers of this podcast who, as soon as something positive and future are put into the same sentence, they're automatically triggered into their reaction of this is hopium and so on. And what I appreciate, Jeff, is that there's this genuineness and this groundedness to your what you've been sharing. In my experience, you mentioned at the very beginning about feeling humble as you were listing this substantial list of what you're up to and your orientation. And that rings true in my read of what you've been sharing and how you've been sharing in this time. I've got to say that I don't know where else to look for some positive juice in these days than to look for that quality of sharing. It's really comes down to that, doesn't it? You know, all we have is how we share with one another and how we presence ourselves. So I just wanted to give you some feedback and some thanks for sharing that presence with us. I indeed would be delighted to have you back. And next time, whenever that is, I would love to hear what you're up to with regard to consciousness and money. That has certainly, as old as I am, it's been a big issue that putting those two words together, consciousness and money, so for as long as my life's been going on and for generations beyond. And so I'm curious. I'm very curious what you bring, and also very curious to hear what sounds like you have quite a bit of awareness going over to India. And I've been to India myself, and I have some very similar concerns and more about the now more volatile than ever condition of India. So I really look forward to reconnecting with you, hearing about things we haven't yet had a chance to speak about, and updates about the things we have. Jeff Vanderkloot, thank you so much for joining us here.
Dean Walker, thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure, actually. It's been deeply nourishing as I get ready to have many flights to various places. I will carry this energy and presence with me. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, and good travels to you.
Blessings.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.